I, Frederik Willem de Klerk, do swear to be faithful to the Republic of South Africa.
I've got like mixed reaction in my mind because I'm thinking this is one of the last apartheid presidents in South Africa. Because when someone of that stature passes away, you have to just go back to who they are, how they are known, and basically the footprints that they've left behind. Medium-term budget policy statement day in Parliament. We all prep to, give the viewers what the finance minister is going to say. I'm there with our business editor, Xolani. So we're there interviewing members of Parliament, asking them what they're anticipating, etc. And so Xolani and I were actually standing on the side of the precinct just next to the National Assembly stairs. And we're having a conversation about how we should handle the interviews with the MPs, etc., etc. And a black bird literally just pops up in front of the tree where we're standing. So I'm having this conversation with Xolani and he starts noticing the black bird. And I see that I'm losing him in the conversation. And then I also turn to look. And then he says, that black bird is saying something. And then literally a minute after that, one of our colleagues there that was sitting with us said, FW De Klerk is late. And then Xolani looks at me and is like, that's what the bird was saying. So we quickly now have to start, rearranging our resources. Who's gonna go there? We've got all our resources here for budget. So which camera's gonna go? And obviously I have to now leave Parliament and go to De Klerk's house.
Received a message from Mrs. Salita De Klerk informing me about the sad passing of FW De Klerk.
We rush to Sea Point. So Parliament is in the CBD in town. So we have to rush. We get to Sea Point, Fresno, where we drive up the mountains. We get there and there's already about 2 local media houses just stationed outside, of course, like we were going to be. So we get there. I've got mixed reaction in my mind because I'm thinking this is one of the last apartheid presidents in South Africa. It's a big story in that sense, in a democratic dispensation, when you get to revisit things that happened in the past, it's like opening up of wounds of some sort. But obviously, as a reporter and as a journalist, you have to take your feelings out of the story and just focus on the facts at hand. We get there, put up our cameras, I'm latched, and now I have to tell the story of De Klerk. Because when someone of that stature passes away, you have to just go back to who they are, how they are known, and basically the footprints that they've left behind, the trail. So we're standing outside, the gates are locked. So I go on air, tell them about what happened. The foundation has confirmed De Klerk has passed away. This is him. This is a bit of a background just, to appraise our viewers. And, I think one of the most interesting things about that story and being there at the particular point in time was actually capturing the hearse coming in and out. To a point where we even had international media begging us for the footage because we got there before everyone else in terms of international media, and we were literally one of the first few people to arrive. And the De Klerk Foundation did not want to confirm, but we could see the vehicle, the make. It's a Mercedes. It's got no seats at the back. It's like got a bit of tint to the windows. And you can see that this is definitely, and I mean, in my mind, or in all of our minds, we're thinking, it can't be it. The body must have left by now. You know, because, you know, they calculate when they're going to break the news because they know media's going to be out there, etc. So we didn't think that would be the moment where he leaves his house for the very last time.
We are coming from those painful days. It was very difficult to emerge out of that pain. Well, if we can go back, all of us have got stories to tell. Painful stories that can discourage us from going forward.
De Klerk Foundation, I'm happy De Klerk Foundation said De Klerk is going to be cremated. It's good. He deserves cremation.
There's a media frenzy immediately, you can imagine. There's media from Brazil, there's media from everywhere, literally just stationed outside his home. We're all asking ourselves questions, okay, what now? You know, he's passed away. Who's gonna come? The question is, who's gonna pay a visit? So we're all asking ourselves, what's gonna happen now? Who's gonna come? We know, for one, the president is in town because of budget. We know there's various members of the state that are in Cape Town for budget. So who's gonna make an appearance? You know, there's a lot of controversy around De Klerk. So it's like, who's gonna be bold enough to come and visit the family? We stayed there for hours on end with no one arriving. And it's interesting because we were talking amongst ourselves as reporters, and we said, you know, there might not be anyone coming, but that might actually be the story. The least we saw was people delivering, net florists delivering flowers. And we thought to ourselves, that might actually be a story in itself. No one visiting. No one showed up, but there was certainly a hive of activity online, on social media, internationally, locally, you name it. People were rejoicing for someone's death, you know, and that's just basically the reaction that was on social media. Julius Malema tweeted, so many people were like planning, you know, parties in celebration. People were not happy about him being referred to as former president. People were very specific about he needs to be referred to as the last apartheid president. The families, of course, the victims, the Cradock families, Lucanio Calata's family, many other families who never even got answers from the TRC, for instance. Families like the Northcrest massacre family. So it certainly closed that opportunity to get them closure. So they never got closure. So I knew immediately there had to be another way of telling the story. The Northcrest massacre happened in 1993. A group of youngsters, teenagers, were in Northcrest. So basically, De Klerk and his entourage, because he was leading the state security at the time, he was also the president of the apartheid government. So they thought they had intelligence on an UPLA base in Northcrest. And so there are stories around how they might have studied the movements of that particular house, which they were under the impression that it was an UPLA base. But it was kids. To sum it up, there were 5 of them. And so they went to go study because it was exam time, and they were basically doing a whole night study situation, and they just came in, and De Klerk gave the order, and that was the end of the kids.
Ndiva kabuhlungu kuba kwizinto zonke besizenza njengoba sekuthe kwafika nabantu abathe i-statement besinethemba loba sawude sifike kuye uDe Klerk achaza abantu awayebathumele kuba wathi sokwe nalapha nantsiyeni abanye ithetha loo nto uba bathunyelwa nguye besifuna abantu ke abaxele uba ngoobanini.
So they were all shot and killed. And so even today, 28 years down the line, you get inside that house, you still see bullet shots in the ceiling, in the walls, in the wardrobes, around the bed. They were shooting that house like crazy. So you can just imagine the bloodbath. So the father, Sqebo, came in and he described to me how he got there with one of his sons facing down. When he tilted his body, he was just bloody, full of bullet wounds, and words fail me, especially looking at the effects of the apartheid government that was led by De Klerk, and that little to nothing was ever done. For me, that's what's most triggering. Absolutely nothing was done. How many years are we into democracy? You still have traumatized families. And this man dies with all the answers that they had hoped for.
My dad was a selfless man. My dad would wake up every morning, 4:30, when some of you are still sleeping, and he'd be out there fighting and serving the country. My dad would come home sometimes past midnight, 2:30, or he'd be typing his very detailed dockets to 3:30 in the morning, and 4:30 he's ready to leave. That was the kind of dedication and commitment my dad had.
He had a relationship with the media, because every time one of these alleged, gang lords would get arrested, he would be part of the investigating team. So we'd often, reach out to him for comment or questions, etc. And so when the news broke about him passing away, you get shaken, because it's one of those people who you think is always going to be around. Lieutenant Colonel Charl Kinnear was an anti-gang top cop in the Western Cape. When you think about Cape Town, you think gangsterism, right? And he was one of the lead investigators that would get these kingpins behind bars. And so killing someone like him certainly draws a lot of attention then to who did it.
There is a lot of linkage between the Western Cape crime and the Gauteng crime, especially when it comes to the illegality of pushing the firearms, giving the firearms to the gangs, giving the firearms to the people that are not supposed to. So he was just there dealing with those matters.
It certainly was a huge story for the Western Cape, to a point where the police minister nationally had to come down. And so when he passed away, it was a huge shock. It was a huge shock, sent out shock waves throughout the Cape. And then obviously the big question is, who did it? Where was he killed? How was he killed? How was he killed? He was sitting in his car outside of his house. It was the 17th of September. He had literally just pulled through. And he had actually called his son, his eldest son, inside the house because he has a garage, and he asked him to get the vehicle out so he could park his in, etc. So he called his son, asked him to do it, but before that could actually unfold, a guy roaming the street came close range and started firing those shots.
My son was busy watching a football match. He got up, and just as he got outside, he heard the shots fired.
This, of course, was, exposed through the CCTV cameras that were all over his house. It speaks to the fact that he knew that his life was always at risk.
And I know somewhere between my office and home, them phoning me again, I asked my eldest, how is Daddy? And then he told me, Mom is gone.
What happened to his protection? Until today, we still don't have those answers. And I mean, you can imagine when you investigate like the kingpins of, the gangs in the Western Cape, you're definitely going to be a target. So he knew that. But I mean, he kept on trying to alert the guys to let them know that I need serious protection, because there was a point where they withdrew his protection with no, reasonable answers as to why. His wife raised it. No answers were given. And so it was very interesting because at the time he was, of course, investigating another big case involving illegal guns and, gang lords and the underworld in Cape Town. And so in that document that he wrote to the top brass in the Western Cape and nationally it reached the National Commissioner's Office, he was basically alerting them to how he thought that there was some kind of corruption within the intelligence in the Western Cape and how it needed to be disbanded and how they actually needed to look into how they were functioning as a crime intelligence in the Western Cape, because he claimed that some of the top cops were, corrupt. But what became more interesting then was the first arrest linked to his murder. And that's someone that they brought from Johannesburg to Cape Town, a former rugby player, Charl Kinnear. And you start asking yourself, who's Charl Kinnear? What does he do? He used to be a rugby player. But now he's arrested and he's linked to the murder of this top cop. So we find out more details in court that he had been allegedly pinging his phone to actually monitor his movements and to find out where he was at what point in time. Very interesting revelations coming out of court. I think one of the most interesting revelations was finding out how these people were able to basically intercept communication just to find out where the Kinnear family is, where they were. I remember Mrs. Kinnear, she expressed how shocked she was to find out in court that they knew her every single movement, whether it be she went for grocery shopping, for a nail appointment. They knew where they were. Interesting and very scary for the family, because to think that you were under surveillance this whole time. Again, so I thought there's definitely another way of telling the story. Can we then perhaps try to get the point of view of those affected? Let's get to speak to Mrs. Kinnear.
I don't wish what my family is going through on any other family, but I refuse to look or have to look another widow in the eye and then think and ask myself, if only. Because if I listen to that woman and I hear that she's actually going through exactly what I was going through all those years ago, I don't then want to have regrets and say, if only I spoke about it, maybe they would have listened, you know, or maybe somebody would have written an article about it or done an interview about it or something. I don't want that, because then I have blood on my hands too.
And one of the questions that I asked her is like, did you really know that you are marrying someone that is as passionate about, you know, crime in South Africa as Mr. Kinnear? And she said, undoubtedly, she knew. For him, she said it was a calling. And so that's why he was able to uncover so much out of the gang world in the Western Cape.
As a family, we avoided public places. If we needed to move in a public place, he would never walk with us, for example, even in a mall. We would never walk together. So it would always be very easy for him to say, if we say we're just going in somewhere quickly, he would wait.
Because you, as a family member, also become a target. She was really passionate about trying to get the wives, the children of other top cop investigators protected. Because the answers about why the protection was withdrawn, still no answers today.
Although no arrests have been made at this stage, the Minister of Police, Nicolette, has promised that heads will roll and that they will bring to book those responsible for the murder.
Do you have anyone that you are currently questioning?
No. You mean internally or with the police or with the criminals out there?
Linked to the murder of Lieutenant Colonel Charl Kinnear.
Yes, true. There are parallel processes. We'll have to investigate internally, as everybody knows that we do have a problem. Everybody has acknowledged, as you say, that there were reports that were sent there. But at the same time, we'll have to find the criminals that pulled the trigger. If those criminals are among themselves, they can't be both the police and the criminals. They'll have to choose, and we'll have to deal with them as such.
It's such a sensitive case that, you know, you just want to tread very carefully around it and where you're positioned, etc., because it's a known fact. In Cape Town, if you're one of those investigative journalists that's really invested in uncovering the underworld, you yourself are going to become the target. Charl Kinnear was one of the top investigators, not just in the Western Cape, but at a national level. He often came to Johannesburg to continue part of his investigations. And if he doesn't get protection, are you really safe as the next person, or as someone who wants to be a whistleblower in South Africa? You're definitely not safe. Gangsterism is wreaking havoc in Cape Town. It's destroying families. It's just crippling society. You just see so many young boys getting recruited. I remember one of my early years as a journalist doing an undercover story, just sitting around gangsters and trying to find out what goes through their minds. They pride themselves in how many people they've been able to shoot. They pride themselves about the number of times they've been in and out of prison. That's for them like the it thing. Like, how many people have you killed? You've killed one person, you're nothing. You know, I asked them, how do you sleep at night? They're like, easy, my sister, we just sleep. You just do it, you in and out. Me, I can kill your mother, your father, everyone. I sleep easy at night. That's what the young boy, 12-year-olds, telling you about how they could wipe your entire family off without feeling anything. That's how the gang lords kind of, they shape their minds, and they just make them think that there's nothing better except for being part of a gang. This is definitely something that was close to his heart. He grew up in the Cape as well. So, you know, he definitely could see the extent of damage this organized crime syndicate causes in the communities at large. And that some people have little to no choice but to join these gangs.
Because of the fact that he was thinking of those bleeding families on the Cape Flats, those bleeding families in farm murders, wherever, robberies. He was thinking about those families and not only my family. Hence why he continued doing what he was doing.
Remember at his memorial service, a young cop that was trained by Kinnear, he stepped out. I could see he was in tears, but he was in uniform because, of course, he was on duty, but it was a memorial service. I followed him. I followed him out, and I could see he was crying, so I gave him a moment. I was like, how are you feeling? And he started, you know, letting me know that he was trained by Kinnear, and he took me into his confidence to say, well, we don't know if it's going to be safe for us. So the next generation that he trained will start fearing. Maybe they might just end up like him, getting killed. So it's a sense of reality sinking in, that you cover these stories. There's little that you can give the viewer in as far as hope is concerned, because when you really, really look at the situation, you get to realize that organized crime is entrenched in our system.
The case against 8 Nigerian nationals who were arrested in Tableview in October.
So the story broke about how there are foreign nationals who've been arrested for allegedly scamming people online. If you're lonely and you're wealthy, you're gonna be a target. So it was deemed the romance story. It was almost like a movie scene, right? Because this was a collaborative effort between the FBI in America and the Hawks in South Africa. So you can imagine the guys coming in from Interpol, coming in to conduct the arrest. Parklands is an area in Cape Town which is known to have foreign nationals, right? These are Nigerian nationals that got arrested. There's always this stereotypical idea and this narrative that, you know, Nigerian nationals in South Africa are here for one thing or the other. So they are all over Parklands, Bloberg side. And so the arrest happened there. The cops got there and immediately seized their laptops, Macs, the luxury cars. I mean, the cars that were there, people like us would not be able to afford, at least now. So they invaded their house and, started taking their cell phones, your Mercedes, your S-Class, your Porsche vehicles, etc. So yeah, they managed to seize their assets, and so the story broke about how there are foreign nationals who've been arrested for allegedly scamming people online. So it was deemed the romance story. So a lot of people were like so intrigued about, how do you get scammed romantically online, And then you start thinking about all these dating sites and, how people meet each other online. Has it ever really been safe? And now that there are people arrested for scamming people online, you start really, confirming these ideas that you've had about how unsafe it is to meet people romantically online through these dating sites. So yeah, they got arrested, and their first court appearance was one that was very much anticipated in terms of what was then going to come out in terms of the detail of how they actually got to scam people online.
Because of local and international news interest in the case, it took a while before the circumstances around the case could be heard in court due to several applications that were made by media houses.
Given that this is an urgent matter, do you view this as some form of delay?
Look, the onus is on their side. The accused are in prison. I don't think we are much more bothered than them. They are supposed to be more bothered because their clients are in prison. So I feel they are the ones who are supposed to make sure that the things are hastened up to ensure that their clients are out. But like you heard from them, they are trying to say this is a Schedule 1, which means they are moving away from the onus. Because on a Schedule 5, the onus is with the defense, with the accused, to show to the court that they deserve to be given bail on this matter.
We got there, the entire courtroom was flanked by private investigators, undercover cops, people from Interpol, probably, even the FBI and members of the Hawks from South Africa, all flanking. The courtroom was so packed, so packed. I think most of us were just so interested to actually see the faces. Who are these people? How do they look like? But then you get to discover that how they look like really doesn't matter, because it's how they try to paint themselves online, because they allegedly also use false names. They try to be basically people that they're not. And it's interesting, the target market, like who they actually targeted. They preyed specifically on widows, right? Online widows, divorcees, people who are just looking for love, genuinely. Some people even got scammed out of their fortunes, out of their inheritance. They go for the wealthy. I mean, that's how they were able to secure millions. So if you're someone who doesn't have the money, but is looking for love, you're probably safe. But if you're that one person who's rich, wealthy, looking for love, online is not the way to go. So they were able to, paint themselves as these vulnerable, loving human beings. They developed relationships. I mean, they were in relationships allegedly with these victims for months, where they were communicating. I mean, how else do you get to defraud someone out of millions? You develop a trust, kind of a relationship with them. Very successful. I mean, these guys were masterminds. And one thing that is very interesting about this case is that the FBI knows that they've got one of the ringleaders. It's an international syndicate. So they are wanted in America, in New Jersey and Texas. Most of their victims are there, and in South Africa. And so the FBI is closely watching developments in South Africa in court, specifically because they want to find out when are we getting these guys to our shores so we can deal with them. Because the amount of money that they defrauded people out of, it's like you have to be a scammer. You really have to know how to work someone's mind. You really have to know how to lie to someone to an extent where they trust you enough to think that, or be under the impression that they're in a relationship with you.
What goes through your mind when you see operations of this nature actually taking place in South Africa?
Well, as we've been in court today, you come to realize that a lot of these cyber attacks has been going on in South Africa at the moment. These investigations is not only from now. We're facing cases right from 2016, from 2008. So these people have been in the country for a very long time. And they've been hunted for quite some time already.
South Africa has not yet charged these men. It's charges that they face in America, and that's why it would then be important to extradite them to America, where they'll go and actually face the full might of the law. The state was obviously of the view that this is a very serious matter, and it obviously needed the weight of a higher schedule. But the defense was under the impression that this is a Schedule 1 offense, and this is subsequently what the magistrate ruled over. And so this means that they could potentially get bail, even though we know that the state has argued against it, saying these guys are flight risks, because if they dare get out on bail, the impression is that we'll never see them again. Those guys are so protected. We get nothing visual-wise. They close off every single loophole that you think you'd get through. We can't even get them coming out of court into the SAPS vehicles, which is what we normally get for suspects. So we ask ourselves questions: why are they so guarded? Why are they so protected?
We started with a media application where media wanted to be able to broadcast the proceedings live, as there has been a wide interest in this case, not only locally but internationally as well. As the state, we motivated why there is a need for that, as not everyone can be in court, and that the media has a right, and as was a judgment in the SCK case, in the FW matter, and then we left it to the court to decide. Then the defense opposed that, but the court did agree, but with some limitations, where the media can be able to take pictures 15 minutes before the proceedings start.
But, the magistrate herself ruled that media should not capture their faces, even though the state argued that their names are already out there. This is a public interest case, and it's going to raise awareness about these scams online. If we had to put it in, converted to South African rands from dollars, about 100 million. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, because there were many, many victims. There are many people from America that have been allegedly scammed by these guys. There were talks, that there's a lot more that will eventually come out of the case. This is such an important story because most of the world's population is online. Because a lot of people are online and a lot of people become vulnerable to these scams, they were able to foster these relationships with these people online. And the victims were really under the impression that they are loved, that they are cared for, that they've finally, received that closure after, the death of their loved one or after their divorce. These people are, masterminds in terms of, the lies. I don't know. I'm just trying to imagine the conversations that would then unfold between them. Say, for instance, on a WhatsApp chat, you can just imagine how these guys are so convincing. They must have really been convincing. Charmers of note. Shots start getting fired. And this is something that affects the ordinary South African.
The death toll now stands at 76.
Ndiziva kabuhlungu kakhulu because isoyika uhamba. Kunzima noba uyaphi uhamba usoyika. Awuzazi noba uzawubuya okanye awuzubuya.
This is their daily lived reality.
Our endeavor as the national government is to bring stability in terms of policy and regulating the industry and ensuring that these wars come to an end, where people fight for routes, illegal operators come into the picture, because at the end of the day, it becomes which route is lucrative. And then that is what they fight about.
Immediately when the story broke, it was literally right in the middle of a warfare that had been brewing between two taxi associations.
A Qatar Taxi Association chairperson in Atlantis was attacked, and an attempted murder case was opened by the police.
It's a historical thing to have rival taxi associations fight amongst each other. I mean, it was prevalent even before I was born.
The taxi violence in terms of routes in our country is as old as me and you.
And to still have its ugly head rearing itself even today brings to mind how things don't really get resolved in the way that you would think they should be resolved.
We are deeply concerned as operators and leaders in the Western Cape. That is why we are making all endeavors trying to solve this, not by barrel of gun, by talking to one another. So there is continuous engagements.
So when I heard of the victim, because often you hear about these taxi-related shootings where one of the people from one of the taxi associations gets shot and killed, but in this instance, the victim was unfortunately a commuter. And interestingly, not just a commuter, a young girl, 21-year-old, with a bright future ahead of her. I was definitely interested to cover the story because now it brings to fore the reality of these taxi-related shootings, that it's not just about the taxis, that the people that rely on taxis.
Communities are suffering. I've seen school kids that did not go to school today. I've seen parents that did not go to work. But taxi industry itself, that making no money, drivers making no money, owners making no money. We hope the matter will be resolved.
A huge, significant proportion of South Africans rely on minibus taxis to commute on a daily basis. And this is something that affects the ordinary South African. And so that's why it's important to tell this type of story, because you often hear people say, they reach out to us as journalists, okay, so is it okay for us to go to a taxi rank near us? Is it okay? Are taxis working? You get messages where people ask you, Athi, so which routes are closed? Which area is not safe? Because this is their daily lived reality. And so when they fight, it automatically affects the ordinary South African. And so when a victim dies who was never even part of the infighting that's happening within the taxi industry, it just breaks your heart. It's just very unfortunate.
Ndiva kabuhlungu kakhulu because umntanam kangagule ekugqibeleni. Wavele wadutyulwa nje ndingalindelanga kungekho bani ebeyazi. So kubuhlungu andifuni uphosisa kubuhlungu and kunzima uyamkela.
Okuhle James is sitting at home with her family, and her mother decides to send her to a store locally. And to get there, she would need to use a taxi. So Okuhle gets sent, she leaves her home, she gets onto a taxi. She gets onto the taxi, it gets to some stop, but when it gets there, shots start getting fired. Everyone is ducking, everyone is, because also at that point in time, everyone was kind of like on edge because there had been a number of taxi-related shootings, but commuters, I guess, never really think that this would happen to them, right? They always hear about it happening there or there, but also at the same time, they really don't have any other choice to commute, so they are going to then use their taxis, whether they know that their lives are at risk or not. Okuhle gets hit. One of the taxi association members gets hit, but she dies. She's not the only one that was hit. There are other victims that got hit. A young child was rushed to emergency services nearby. At the time, the child was critically injured and they were still luckily alive, unlike Okuhle, whose life was cut short. At 21, your life is just literally beginning.
Since January, 81 people have been killed here. And since beginning of July, 24 people have been killed. There have been arrests. I've seen that it's about 21 murder arrests that have happened.
I get to Okuhle James's home and I start preparing to interview her mother. I'm the first journalist to talk to her. I get there. In our Black culture, when someone passes away, you get relatives and even members of the community come to your house to mourn with you. So they were all sitting in the living room. I remember stepping into the home, and because generally most of the stories that I do are murder related, I already know the drill. I know how it goes. You get there and the mood is just somber. You can just feel the weight of the burden that they're feeling now as a family and, as a community. It was at that point that I realized that the National Minister of Police and the MEC of Transport, that they have to get out of the negotiating table with these taxi bosses and go to the victims and go to the families that have just lost their loved ones.
We all acknowledge that we made a public commitment to end violence. And the very next day, there was another taxi murder. So we're back at that. So during the course of this day, myself and the National Minister, we will continuously update the media. So I don't want to preempt the outcome.
I interviewed Okuhle James's mother. She said to me, no one has come. So I thought there is absolutely no way where I myself can't do anything about this. I thought the Minister of Transport definitely has to come and visit this family. The MEC, for instance, needs to come and visit this family. The taxi bosses have to come and visit this family.
As we are here, Athi, here and now is to protect the life, because people that die and got injured are not only the people in the taxi industry, are ordinary 21-year-old young women, some of them by their stray bullets, some of them got nothing to do with that.
You start seeing the faces behind the stats, because the number of people that were getting killed was just climbing, and it was often the members of the associations, but now it's like the commuters are now getting affected. This thing is getting out of hand now. This is now beyond just the two rival taxi associations. This is affecting commuters. So when I spoke to Okuhle James's mother, it was a matter of, these people have to come to you. They have to come to you. You've lost. She was in so much disbelief. She said to me, it feels like she's gonna step into the house with a plastic full of groceries that I sent her out for.
Kunzima uyamkela. I feel like ulele okanye kuzawuthi hayi kwenzeke impazamo uzawuphinda abuye. So it's hard, honestly. Yeah.
And so the minister subsequently went to go visit the family, and we believe that they at least managed to cover the costs for the funeral, at least. I mean, these stories really do get to us, and I know people think we just get to people's homes just to shove cameras on people's faces to get out of them, but you're human as well, as a reporter, as a journalist. So you have feelings, but because of our job and how professional we have to be, you take yourself out of the story. But looking at Okuhle James's mother and realizing that, you know, you could just sense the pain. It's palpable in all these stories. But where you can make a small difference, do it. But I was like, they have to be known. They have to be known. Because all the ministers were concerned about, or at least the state was concerned about, is the negotiations. And well enough, because that's where you could get this whole issue resolved. But where there are victims, go to them.